Ah, there you are. Not found, not summoned, received. This signal wasn't broadcast. It slipped through the static and landed only where it could survive. If you're hearing this, it's because your mind doesn't belong to the crowd. You were never tuned for noise. You were built for precision, for quiet, for depth that makes weaker systems collapse. You always felt it, even before you had language for it. The sense of standing slightly outside the frame, watching people chase reflections while you studied the source of light. They thought you were slow, distant, distracted. They never understood that you were listening to something else entirely. A lower frequency, heavier, more deliberate. You didn't chase status because chasing is for those who don't understand gravity. You watched how it moves, how it bends rooms, how it gathers around silence and certainty. You saw that status is not claimed by effort but by alignment, by presence, by the refusal to beg the world to notice you. Most people perform. You calibrated. This message isn't here to motivate you. It's here to confirm something you already know, but were taught to doubt. That your restraint was never weakness, that your isolation was never punishment, that the reason you never fit cleanly into roles is because you were never meant to serve inside them. You were meant to design the structure others orbit. A reason praise always felt hollow and criticism never landed. You weren't being tested to become something else. You were being stripped of what you are not, layer by layer, until only signal remained. Most people would panic at this point. They need mirrors, they need applause, they need permission. You learned early how to operate without witnesses, how to move without explanation, how to let silence speak for you. That is why this found you now, not earlier, not later. You are not here to rise, you are here to remember. The status you bought was never external. It was internal ownership, self-recognition, the moment you stopped asking and started standing. This is not a beginning, it's a return. And from here on, everything bends toward you whether it understands why or not. They never read you correctly. Not once. Every time they tried to define you, the shape slipped, intentions twisted, motives projected. You were labeled before you were understood, measured before you moved. Assumptions followed you like weak shadows, always late, always wrong. What they saw was incomplete, and that bothered them more than they admitted. You were passed over without explanation, paused without warning, left waiting in rooms where answers never arrived. Invitations disappeared, promises softened, loyalty thinned quietly. None of it was loud, none of it dramatic. That was the point. It happened in glances, delays, forgotten replies, subtle exclusions dressed as coincidence. They thought you wouldn't notice. You noticed everything. Each dismissal sharpened you. Each delay taught timing. Each closed door trained patience. What they believed would slow you, forced you inward, where focus hardened. Isolation wasn't absence. It was compression. Pressure didn't crush you. It shaped you. While others fractured under expectation, you condensed. Your restraint unsettled them. You didn't over-explain. You didn't perform outrage. You didn't scramble to be seen. Your quiet felt like judgment. Your pause felt like superiority. They mistook discipline for distance and control for coldness. Misunderstanding became their defense. Betrayal arrived softly, not as confrontation, but as omission. As alignment shifts, as people choosing comfort over truth, they convinced themselves it was necessary, justified, temporary. What they didn't realize was that every small fracture revealed something important. You were perceived as a liability, not because you were weak, but because you were uncontrollable. Being underestimated gave you room. Being overlooked gave you time. Being doubted gave you clarity. They relaxed around you, spoke freely, exposed patterns, showed limits, all while believing you were stalled. Every wrong assumption worked in your favor. Every misread strengthened position. You learned that resistance isn't always an obstacle. Sometimes it's a signal. Sometimes it's confirmation that something valuable is forming. They resisted because they sensed depth they couldn't manage, complexity they couldn't predict, potential that didn't need approval. Nothing about this phase was accidental. It wasn't loss. It wasn't failure. It was filtration. Only what mattered stayed. Everything else fell away. And what remains now is solid, precise, and no longer confused by how it is seen. Attention moved outward without announcement. Perception widened, not to hunt, but to register pressure beyond the frame. Something shifted. Glances lingered longer. Pauses stretched. Interest appeared where none existed before. Not admiration, inspection, curiosity, wearing a softer face. Observation surrounded you quietly, not direct, indirect, peripheral. Conversations adjusted when you entered. Questions arrived wrapped as compliments. Advice came unrequested. Concern sounded rehearsed, all of it calibrated to draw reaction, to test leverage, to locate fracture points that never surfaced. They monitored pace, tracked rhythm, waited for fatigue, anticipated collapse that refused to arrive. Patience thinned on their side. Expectancy turned sharp. The longer you held form, the heavier their unease grew. Unreadability breeds unrest. Clarity denied becomes threat. Measurement replaced interaction. Comparisons ran silently. Weight assessed. Potential calculated. Not because you announced capability, but because absence of leakage suggested reserve. Those who survive through exposure mistrust containment. Those who trade emotion for control fear what cannot be provoked. Manipulation attempted subtle entry. Proximity offered. Alignment hinted. Influence disguised as protection. Guidance masked as loyalty. Each move designed to tilt balance, to pull you into visibility, to force disclosure. Nothing worked. Neutrality blocked access. Calm erased handles. They sensed elevation before evidence, rank before recognition, authority without symbols. Status doesn't speak first. It hums. It presses air differently. It changes spacing. People feel it in their bodies before understanding it cognitively. That sensation unsettles those dependent on hierarchy. Your restraint amplified distortion. No tells. No overcorrection. No emotional spill. Absence of confirmation made projections spiral. Fear-filled gaps left by silence. Imagination turned against them. What they couldn't read, they exaggerated. Waiting became uncomfortable. Time favored you. Stillness accumulated mass. Every moment without fracture confirmed suspicion. They weren't watching weakness. They were orbiting gravity. Nothing about this awareness required confrontation. Naming reduces advantage. Recognition alone alters equation. Once perception adjusts, interaction changes automatically. Pressure reveals itself without accusation. This phase wasn't paranoia. It was calibration. Understanding external vectors without engaging them. Awareness without display. Knowing where attention pools, where intentions leak, where tension gathers. From here forward, influence doesn't need declaration. It is registered instinctively, sensed before spoken, acknowledged before proven. Those watching know something has already shifted. They just can't locate where, or how, or why. Something disconnected quietly, not through force, not through collapse, but through clarity. The pull that once reached outward lost strength. What demanded response no longer registered urgency. Stimuli passed without grip. Reactions that once fired automatically simply failed to launch. Nothing was suppressed. It expired. There was no announcement, no dramatic shift, just an internal release. Explanations dissolved. Justification lost purpose. The impulse to correct misunderstandings evaporated. Defense mechanisms stood down. Nothing needed protection anymore. Engagement became optional rather than instinctive. Stillness changed function. It was no longer passive. It carried edge. Absence of response created imbalance around you. People leaned forward without invitation. Tension formed in spaces you refused to fill. Quiet became leverage because it denied access. Access was what others relied on. Limits solidified, not through confrontation, but through consistency. Energy stopped leaking into irrelevant directions. Focus tightened naturally. Fewer inputs entered awareness. Fewer outputs left. Concentration became selective. Intention replaced impulse. Every movement gained weight because nothing was wasted. Approval lost gravity. External acknowledgement faded into background noise. It wasn't rejected. It simply stopped influencing direction. Validation without alignment felt empty. Praise without accuracy failed to land. Dependence dissolved without resistance. Something older shut down. Reflexes built for survival in chaotic environments became obsolete. Overreaction expired. Urgency thinned. Emotional volatility lost traction. What remained was composure with depth, presence without volatility, intensity without display. Distance didn't mean disengagement, it meant choice. Detachment didn't equal coldness, it meant control. Calm wasn't weakness, it was compression. Power gathered internally rather than spilling outward. Timing improved, responses slowed, not out of hesitation but precision. Actions waited until necessary. Words arrived only when they altered outcome. Silence handled most situations alone. This shift wasn't visible immediately. It registered internally first, a sense of solidity, of weight settling evenly, of operating from center rather than edge. The need to be seen fell away. The need to be right disappeared. What mattered became alignment with intent, not reaction to stimulus. Nothing was gained. Something was removed, and in that removal, capacity expanded. What remains now operates with control, clarity, and measured force. No rush, no noise, just presence that no longer asks for permission to exist. Impact registered without motion. Entry alone adjusted atmosphere, not through display, but through density. Spacing recalibrated, voices recalculated volume, exchanges rerouted instinctively. Nothing was requested, nothing was enforced. The environment responded first. Pauses appeared where none existed. Sentences shortened, laughter softened. People recalculated phrasing mid-thought. Certainty surfaced subtly. Hesitation replaced confidence, not fear exactly. Awareness, a sensing of consequence without understanding source. Command no longer required declaration. It arrived embedded. Posture communicated before language. Timing decided outcomes before arguments formed. Stillness anchored focus. Absence redirected attention more effectively than presence ever could. What wasn't said carried more weight than anything spoken. Authorization stopped mattering. Approval lost relevance. Alignment replaced permission. Direction set itself internally. Movement followed choice rather than consensus. External signals no longer dictated pace or position. Orientation came from within, stable and unmoved. Rank detached from symbols. Influence detached from effort. Leverage detached from confrontation. Stature wasn't performed. It was assumed by default. Others adjusted accordingly without instruction. Hierarchy reorganized quietly. Interaction shifted rhythm. Exchanges slowed near you. Urgency dissolved. Impulsiveness retreated. People measured themselves unconsciously. Calibration occurred in real time. They felt something change but couldn't isolate variable. Instinct recognized mass before intellect caught up. This wasn't dominance. Nothing pushed outward. Inevitability replaced force. Outcomes aligned naturally. Resistance felt impractical. Opposition felt inefficient. Momentum favored you without demand. Reality bent subtly, as if accommodating something already decided. Expression simplified. Gestures minimized. Excess stripped away. Economy of motion amplified effect. When you acted, impact followed. When you withheld, tension accumulated. Restraint shaped trajectory more than assertion ever did. Status detached from validation completely. It became sensory, atmospheric, registered before thought. Sense through proximity rather than proof. People felt it in posture adjustments, in recalculated distance, in altered tempo. Nothing about this required maintenance. It sustained itself. No explanation reinforced it. No correction protected it. It existed as condition rather than effort. Presence alone established boundary. Boundary alone defined influence. This shift didn't announce arrival. It revealed permanence. Not something gained, not something proven, simply something recognized by everything around you. Gravity doesn't argue, it functions. And once established, it doesn't need reminders. Motion occurs quietly. No signal precedes direction. Arrival leaves no echo. Position shifts before attention catches up. Pathways are chosen early, long before exposure matters. Nothing announces intent. Nothing seeks witness. Awareness stays active yet untouched. Input enters, output stays minimal. Faces speak louder than mouths. Tension betrays motive. Rhythm exposes weakness. Nothing triggers impulse. Nothing demands response. Observation replaces reflex. Distance preserves clarity. Data accumulates steadily. Fragments align over time. Inconsistencies surface naturally. Repetition reveals structure. Behavior loops give away priority. Silence gathers more than interrogation ever could. Restraint opens access that force never earns. Emotional discharge drains leverage. Most give it away freely. Frustration, excitement, resentment spill constantly. Each leak becomes traceable. Each surge leaves residue. Remaining still keeps reserves intact. Containment protects advantage. Resources turn inward. Focus compounds internally. Energy circulates with purpose. Nothing is wasted on approval cycle. Recognition loses currency. Applause holds no weight. Direction stays private. Progress measures itself quietly. Decision replaces impulse. Timing replaces speed. Angles replace collision. Outcomes are shaped upstream. Nothing reacts blindly. Every movement serves function. Every pause carries intention. Calm becomes operating state, not posture. Order forms beneath surface. Priorities arrange themselves without effort. Complexity simplifies. Noise falls away. What remains is usable. What remains is accurate. Inner alignment stabilizes execution. Chaos finds no entry point. There is no rush to assert. Visibility offers diminishing returns. Control thrives in obscurity. Patience outlasts resistance. Pressure dissolves against consistency. Endurance wins without display. Calculation governs engagement. Cost precedes action. Benefit outweighs exposure. Silence handles most situations efficiently. Presence is optional. Absence often proves stronger. Nothing here seeks domination. Nothing needs confrontation. Effectiveness emerges from structure, not spectacle. Precision beats intensity. Containment beats explosion. This phase isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's systematic. It's deliberate. It's irreversible. Movement continues. Awareness deepens. Leverage compounds. Nothing needs to be said. Everything is already accounted for. Progress detached itself from reference points. Advancement continued without comparison, without explanation, without markers visible to external eyes. What once required context now unfolded independently. No updates, no announcements, no need to translate what cannot be followed. Separation widened without intention. Paths diverged simply because pace differed. While some repeated familiar cycles, repetition lost relevance for you. Momentum carried forward uninterrupted. Not faster in appearance, but deeper in effect. Layers unfolded where surfaces once satisfied. Communication narrowed by choice. Disclosure felt inefficient. Articulation diluted precision. What guided you operated beneath language. Signals stayed contained. Orientation stayed locked inward. Sharing diluted alignment, so silence preserved it. Perception gaps widened. What made sense to you failed to register elsewhere. Not because it was complex, but because it operated on a different axis. Comprehension requires proximity. Proximity no longer existed. Interpretation lagged behind reality. Change compounded quietly, not in leaps, but in accumulation. Direction held steady while capacity expanded. Adaptability sharpened. Range widened. Thresholds moved. What once demanded effort now felt baseline. Recalibration happened internally, unnoticed. Evaluation systems diverged. Measurement came from within. Accuracy mattered more than applause. Precision outweighed recognition. Standards refined privately. No external metric applied anymore. Comparison lost relevance entirely. Separation wasn't rejection, it was consequence. Alignment reshapes proximity. Distance forms automatically when velocity differs. No conflict required. No explanation offered. Paths simply stopped intersecting. What once appeared unreachable became routine. What once intimidated now registered as insufficient. Limits adjusted upward continuously. Expectation followed capability. Restraint ensured sustainability. This progression didn't seek permission. It didn't announce itself. It didn't wait for consensus. It unfolded because conditions were met internally. Nothing outside could slow it. Nothing outside could redirect it. Motion stabilized into certainty. Direction clarified without articulation. Execution followed alignment, effortless. Reversals stopped occurring. Hesitation vanished. This phase wasn't dramatic. It was definitive. A one-way expansion beyond familiar frames. Once past this threshold, return loses meaning. Reference points dissolve. Previous scales no longer apply. What continues now cannot be tracked from where you started. Not because it's hidden, but because it no longer relates. Distance isn't measured anymore. Progress simply continues. Nothing arrived. That was the realization. No addition, no acquisition, no sudden elevation. What occurred felt closer to recovery, like retrieving something buried long before language formed. Recognition surfaced first, then certainty followed. Not discovery, recall. Searching ended because there was never absence. Pursuit stopped because the object had always been internal. Nothing external could supply what was already embedded. The illusion was distance. The illusion was lack. Once those collapsed, movement ceased naturally. Influence lost entry points. Manipulation found no grip. Expectation dissolved. Anticipation failed. Access closed permanently. Not through force, but through completion. Closed systems don't require defense. Finished structures don't invite revision. Prediction became impossible. Patterns no longer repeated invisible loops. Behavior stopped leaking indicators. Direction stayed concealed by design, not secrecy. Even proximity revealed nothing. Observation returned empty-handed. Curiosity starved quietly. Identity stabilized. No oscillation, no recalibration. No need to adjust tone or posture. Alignment locked in. Expression simplified further. Everything unnecessary dropped away. What remained was exact. Nothing needed affirmation. Nothing required reinforcement. Continuity replaced momentum. Presence replaced ambition. Desire lost urgency. Certainty doesn't hurry. Others may sense distance but never breach it. They may feel weight but never trace source. They may attempt categorization and fail repeatedly. Labels slide off. Narratives collapse. Explanation stays unavailable. This state doesn't expand outward. It holds inward. Quiet dominance doesn't announce itself. It allows the world to reorganize around it. Gravity functions without command. Order forms without instruction. Nothing here seeks acknowledgement. Nothing requires belief. It persists, regardless of interpretation. Permanence doesn't argue. Inevitability doesn't explain. This isn't transformation. It's arrival at origin. Not elevation, but placement. Not achievement, but ownership. What was taken is restored. What was muted is audible internally. What was delayed is resolved. There is no next phase after this, only continuation. No crown is placed. It was never removed. You were never becoming anything. You were remembering what already ruled.